Hello there. This is Paul Glumaz, and today is the 27th of May, 2020, and this is being brought to you by General Welfare Presents. The profound situation that we're going into is an incredible one. We have come to the end of a process which began in 1971 when the Bretton Woods system was replaced with a globally London-based dollar floating exchange system. And we were off to the races in terms of using the international monetary system to loot and plunder. By essentially creating a situation where governments no longer had control over their national currencies, but rather the speculators began to have control over their national currencies on an international scale by having the currencies float in a betting pool, so-called financial markets. The values of the currencies no longer reflected the physical economy of the nations. So, in other words, if you were from a particular country, you did not control the currency, and you didn't really have control over how it was used. And because the currency values would fluctuate internationally, so you had to obtain a reserve currency to be able to protect your currency. And this is the beginning of a massive plundering policy, looting policy. And through other political operations and other financial operations and various different ways, starting with the oil hoax and the raising of interest rates by Paul Volcker, which created a massive capital flight out of the rest of the world into the U.S. treasuries, they were able to break these countries and put them into a kind of indebtedness or supine condition with respect to the international financial banking system. And so what basically happened is that nations needed to get their currency, the dollar, to not only pay the debt, primarily. So they were offered a way out by cheap labor. They were offered the opportunity to become sweatshops at very low wages to obtain this currency, but not enough currency to be able to invest in their development, often just to pay the debt. And they were forced also to maintain a reserve of dollars in order to prevent the destruction of their currencies on the speculation. And this system reached its height when George Soros, through massive borrowing with other financiers, launched a massive assault on the Asian currencies in 1997 and 98. This demonstrated the power of this international financial system to crush a country. And they hurt Korea very hard. They crushed Indonesia. They crushed the Philippines. Mahathir, the prime minister of Malaysia at the time, put up a fight, and he established capital controls and prevented his currency from being used in the markets to make it non-usable outside of Malaysia. And he made it so that that anyone coming in with dollars had to exchange it, and vice versa coming out. So he actually did something to protect his nation. And he credits the LaRouche movement and the EIR for much of the intelligence that he used to be able to do this. But what's important here, and George Soros attacked at that time, attacked Mahathir. So you have to understand that that system of cheap labor, of going into China and replacing our manufacturing with Chinese manufacturing, and setting up Walmarts, which took over with these products, and so on. What you ended up doing is basically deindustrializing the United States and cheapening the cost of labor worldwide. And when you did this, what you did is you also increased the situation where you did not have the means to invest in development. For instance, if U.S. industrial development had occurred as a way of exporting the goods to develop other countries, then the United States would have grown industrially, and they wouldn't have gone into a post-industrial society, and these other countries would have developed. The aggregate physical wealth of the world would have grown rather rapidly, and so would the living standards of the world. The opposite has occurred, to the point that there is no way under this global financial system to make any significant investments in the physical infrastructure. So you ended up with situations where people in African countries and Latin American countries and in the U.S. in different ways were flocking to urban areas, pursuing non-productive jobs in the service sector, living at a much lower living standard, in some cases hand-to-mouth in most of these countries. But meanwhile, the agriculture in these countries languished. There was no infrastructure development to be able to develop the agricultural area, because you need to have the infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, to develop agriculture. You can't have it sitting there rotting after it's produced. So essentially, a lot of these countries are just importing food, and then the World Trade Organization came in and said, well, you have to go for the cheapest food. Well, it's more expensive to produce food in an area where there's no infrastructure than where it is. So you ended up having this incredible situation where a globalized economy run where no country really had any independence in terms of its physical economic production. And you ended up in a situation where countries could be held hostage to cut off of food or cut off of oil or whatever, or massive speculation or threats of all different kinds. And then to back that all up, the international financial system used international irregular warfare. That's international terrorism funded to the slush funds offshore that were coming in around the world, especially from the drug trade, to finance international terrorism, to undermine the ability of nations who especially any nations that resisted these measures. They would be targeted for regime change. And to back it all up, to keep Russia and China at bay, you had the U.S. military. You had this massive military-industrial complex and the surveillance state, and later the surveillance state, and all of that. So this system appears to be very powerful, but it had a problem. It was creating an undermining of the physical economy, the ability and the massive cuts in healthcare, in hospitals, in delivery, and many other areas. There were massive cuts, and no bridges are being built in the U.S. No tunnels, very few tunnels. No high-speed rail. The space program was taken down. I mean, in every which way, you have a process whereby nothing new is being replacing what's rotting out, what's through attrition. Nothing lasts forever. A bridge or a dam that was built 50 years ago isn't going to last forever. A nuclear power plant that was built in the 60s isn't going to last forever. In the early 70s isn't going to last forever. These things have to be replaced or replaced by something much better. The U.S. has no high-speed rail. China has a massive amount of high-speed rail. Europe has high-speed rail. The United States doesn't have high-speed rail. Can you think about that? Think about that. So anyhow, so now one part of the world didn't really go along with all of this, and that was China. And China began in the early 90s to reorganize their financial system so that they could finance with their own credit through what are called policy banks, the infrastructural development of China. And through the hard work of the Chinese people and through the fact that all of China's leaders are engineers. You can't be a leader in China without being a certified engineer. Their entire operation was to build up China's infrastructure. And they did that, especially in the last 12 years. And it was very successful. And the living standard of the Chinese rose. By their standards, they've lifted 700 to 800 million people out of poverty. And now they're extending that to the rest of the world through what's called the Belt and Road. So now we have the Belt and Road growing around the world. Development is going around the world in a separate system than the international financial system. And the international financial system crowd sees this as a threat to their system. They see it as a threat. This is the threat that China is going to develop. It's going to keep developing, and there's nothing they can do to stop it, except maybe go to nuclear war or unleash whatever. Now you have to understand that you have a situation which then came about with the virus, the coronavirus, and what it showed in the response to the coronavirus is that Western Europe and the United States did not have the means to deal with it. We did not have the means to deal with it. We didn't have the testing capability. We didn't have the ability to manufacture. We've imported billions of masks from China. We're still importing a lot of what we're using in this war against the virus is still coming from China. So this has caused a crisis and a realization that that this isn't going to work. And so you have a crisis in U.S. policy. And what the British want to do, most of all, is keep their system going, the international system going. And so what they are doing right now is they are trying to get China and Russia, get the U.S. to go to war with China and Russia. If not actually a hot war, at least create such friction that they cannot get together to rewrite a new system, to come up with a new system. Meanwhile, we have all these people now unemployed. The COVID-19 situation has made that much worse. And you have a real crisis. You have a political crisis coming off of this. You have a financial crisis coming off of this. And the question is, what's going to replace this system? Or is it nothing going to replace the system? And Donald Trump has been sucked into the China bashing stuff to some degree, but he is still committed to an industrial revival policy for the United States. So the last thing the British want is to have that industrial revival policy be done in collaboration with or in tandem with, on a global scale, with China. Yeah, you can industrialize if you want. No, you can't. But if you want to do that, you're not going to do it with China. You're not going to have a new system. You're going to have a permanent conflict with China, which will divide the world like it was divided between the Soviet Union and the free world and the communist world. So we're back to that old game. But the most important thing to understand is that that's what they're trying to do to Donald Trump. Okay, you want to industrialize, fine. But the most important thing is that Donald Trump has a policy of reviving the space program. This is huge. This is what Obama took down. This is what previous administrations took down. And because of the takedown, the U.S. has had to rely more on the private sector, especially SpaceX. And SpaceX is launching the Falcon to the ISS space station. First time the U.S. has launched a rocket to the space station. Up until now, it's being resupplied by Russian rockets. This is the first time. And this is very interesting because what SpaceX is developing is a reusable rocket. And so this is very important. This is the future of going to the moon, creating ability to shuttle between the moon's surface and the orbit of the moon, and begin to develop the capability of developing the moon. This is the future. And Trump is totally committed to that future. The alternative to this is the green policy. It's genocide. It's taking the crisis and shoving the financial system down to green projects, cutting off credit to further industrial development, and then letting people starve to death on a mass scale, which they're about to do in the near future because of this, because of the lockdown and the collapse of the physical economy. So we're looking at famine on a global scale. So they want to create this war with China. They want to create this conflict with China. This is, and Pompeo is the one leading this in the Trump administration, and he's gone so far as to threaten Australia, because one of their states, the state of Victoria, one of their provinces or state of Victoria's government has a special relationship with China, has signed a memorandum of understanding for trade, and he's going after all the U.S. governors that have trade deals. The FBI is now going after Chinese students, Chinese professors, Chinese what have you. They're launching a massive campaign against the Chinese threat, Chinese espionage, Chinese this. And this is getting very serious. And this is causing a lot of problems because the U.S. depends a lot on China. The U.S. massively depends on the Chinese because they provide a large portion of our scientists now, a large portion of our tech people, a large portion of our engineers. They graduate from U.S. universities, and many of them stay in the U.S. and continue our research facilities, our universities. A lot of what we produce in our country has components that come from China. You just can't cut China off completely. Yes, they're going to try to delist the Chinese companies in the New York Stock Exchange and elsewhere, so that Chinese companies cannot organize and obtain capital from international markets. That is, Chinese companies cannot use not raise capital in Western areas. So there's this all-out assault on China getting underway, and China, most of all, is being blamed for the virus, for either causing the virus or, more importantly, not notifying in time. And this is, even Donald Trump has adopted this perspective. And Donald Trump has gone so far in quite a few occasions as to say that Joseph Biden is the preferred candidate of the Chinese. I don't think that the Chinese prefer any particular candidate. They just don't know where this is all going to go. And so they're doing their best to try to maintain a cooperative relationship with the U.S. The Foreign Secretary of China, the Foreign Minister of China, Wang Yi, spoke at the Congress of the Peoples, and he said that, the policy is to maintain a cooperative relationship with the United States at this time. So the Chinese are committed to a cooperative relationship, no matter what, because that's because that cooperative relationship is what is needed. And if that were to totally collapse, that would further collapse the U.S. economy and the world economy. But without a future collaboration between the U.S. and China, there is no possibility of having the power between the two most powerful economic nations, joined by other nations, to crush the British Empire. And that's the whole point. If you want to have a future, you have to crush this British Empire. You have to crush it completely. You cannot let it continue. It runs the drug trade. It runs the offshore system. It runs an international system of slave labor. It runs culture of degeneracy. It runs the U.S. media. It runs the Obama apparatus. It runs the conservative Steve Bannon, which actually more European, Austrian more European Habsburg connected, but it runs the cover for the coup that's being run, and it's being orchestrated, and the whole China thing is being orchestrated. The British are also trying to orchestrate a Chinese opposition to Trump within the U.S. Chinese population. So this is how they're playing it. They're playing every which way, but the most important thing is to prevent the U.S. and China from collaborating in the post-COVID period. And that's the whole point. What is the post-COVID period going to look like? Now, the LaRouche movement is now intervening in the most massive way. We have now written the first part of, and it's on the LaRouche PAC website, of creating 1.5 billion new jobs in the world and creating 50 million new jobs in the United States. And this report, of which you can now read the first 3 chapters, goes into detail on the LaRouche concepts of physical economics and how we got to a position where we have this massive underemployed, unemployed, and misemployed population, which is in the 50 million range in the U.S. Now, if those people were doing something productive, they were involved in rebuilding this country, you would have a surplus. You would have a surplus. You would have people employed. You would have an entirely different country. And if you did it on a global scale, 1.5 billion is people that are either unemployed, misemployed. Then you would essentially pull out of whatever crisis. You would go forward. You would go ahead. But the most important thing is 2 areas for the future. One is the revival of the space program, and the other is going to fusion. But fusion is still a ways off. In the meantime, the most potentially wonderful thing that could be done is the development of small modular nuclear reactors that can be exported. In other words, instead of building a nuclear power plant somewhere, it takes a while, it takes a long time, it's huge, it's 1 gigawatt, or 2 gigawatts or 3 gigawatts, 1,000 megawatts, gigawatt. You build modular nuclear reactors that are much smaller, but can be transported and put up. And we have a company in Oregon that's come a long ways in this respect. It's called NuScale. And there are other countries that are developing this. South Korea is one. Russia is another. We are. And this is the potential for delivering massive amounts of power in smaller units. Units that could, run an industrial complex or provide electricity for 500,000 people or a couple 100,000 people. And you can put them together like Lego blocks, you put them together, you can string them and have an incredible amount of power, but you don't have to do the whole, they're smaller, and you don't have to do this whole routine of building this massive structure. They're modular. And this is where the big push is going to be for the future, because this is perfect for places like Alaska, places like third world countries. It's perfect to get the electricity. If there's no electricity in a third world country, you're not going to have a healthcare program. Now, without that kind of approach, you're not going to have the means for a global health. New Silk Road is what we're calling it, and we have a petition on our website on a global healthcare system. So one of the things you want to generate, besides the infrastructure development, is to develop the hospitals and the healthcare delivery systems for the world. And so this is where the future economic development lies. So we are entering this incredibly credible world, potentially, and we're not far off from it. We the election situation is going to be very nasty. very ugly. And whether or not Trump is reelected, and there's really no other option, because he's the only one that really wants to go in that direction. But he's caught in the middle of this financial system where he's defending the financial system, defending the stock markets, defending the system which can't be defended. And that's where he's caught. He's caught in that. And that's where Pompeo and Mnuchin and this crowd operated. They are saying, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. You're going to threaten the financial system. But once the financial system goes, then there's no reason for Trump to hold up the financial system. We need to go into a new one. And that's why they want Trump out. So you have two British operations, one around Pompeo, one around Obama and Biden. And then you have the Trump organization, which is under Trump's control. And those are your three basic centers of activity going into the 2020 election on December 5th. But whether Trump gets elected or not, to a large degree, will depend on whether the population is remaining optimistic in the possibilities that Trump might represent in the future. Just like they did originally in 2016 when Trump said he wants to make America great again. He wants to industrially develop the United States. He wants to end the endless wars. He wants to have decent relations with Russia and China and so forth. Those promises were never really fully carried out. There was some small economic development, but that did not suffice. So the question is, will people be optimistic about a second term of Donald Trump? If they're not, then probably Donald Trump could probably be defeated in the election, and then you'll get hardcore green fascism coming down on you like nobody's business, and it's going to be bone crushing, brutal. Environmental restrictions, green, no industry, no development, etc. It's going to be ugly, and they're going to try to enforce that on the rest of the world through military means. So it's going to be really, really ugly if going into the election, but especially if Trump is not able to secure re-election. But if he's able to secure re-election, it has to be on the basis of a program of economic development. And the LaRouche movement is now putting forward that program of economic development. And I recommend that you go to the website, LaRouchePAC.com, and take a look at that program. Now is the time for that program to be implemented. Now is the time for that to happen.